Can you become avoidant because of your past adult relationship and not necessarily because of childhood trauma? So there is a lot of content and information out there that suggests that feeling insecure in relationships is entirely due to significant childhood traumas. But the reality is, even if you have a charmed childhood and let's say a primarily secure disposition as an adult, it is entirely possible to become insecure in the same way that insecure adults did when they were kids. And so in this segment and in answering this question here, I really want to touch upon number one, the importance of the nervous system's natural impulses and how it functions to keep us safe. Number two, the impact of things like mixed signals in communication and confusing behavior on a secure person. And then thirdly, the role of our epigenetic expression, the environment, and our temperament in really molding our attachment styles. So the goal here is to help you understand how even secure individuals can develop insecurities as an adult and then be able to kind of recognize when are those patterns popping up so that you can maintain your emotional security and also be able to foster healthier connections and make better choices so you don't fall into those insecure traps. Okay. Now, before I continue, just give me a note or a comment there in the chat to let me know if this is something you've ever wondered. Can someone who's secure become insecure? I'd love to know if this is something that resonates with you. So the first thing, let's talk about the nervous system and its natural impulses. We want to define what does it mean to be secure versus insecure in a relationship. So being secure basically means that you feel more confident, you trust in your own worth and value, and you usually have an expectation of trust in the relationship with a partner. Now, in contrast, when we tend to slip into insecure attachment styles, we usually harbor deep-seated doubts, fears, and uncertainties about our value, our worth, our capabilities, and then we may approach relationships with an expectation of failure or suspicion or distrust. I believe being in a more secure state is really our natural state, and that everyone has a secure version of themselves within them. And so if we are struggling with insecurity, it's just a matter of kind of wiping the goop off of the light bulb, right? We're just moving all of the things that got in the way of seeing and understanding and connecting to that, what I call sovereign self inside. To understand how insecurity develops, then we want to look at what are these responses of the nervous system, the fight, flight, or freeze response. These are responses that are deeply ingrained in our biology, and they play that crucial role in our survival. When we're fighting, this is when we are faced with a threat, and our body basically revs up to meet the challenge, to confront it, to eliminate the threat. And in this case, you might feel angry, frustrated, compelled to argue. You're meeting the threat. When we slip into the flight response, this is the impulse that makes us close up, disconnect, want to escape, move away from, right? Withdraw from the threat. And so this is when we feel that zing in our stomach, I need to get out of here. And we want to make for the door. This is when we start to emotionally withdraw or distance ourselves. Now, the freeze response usually comes up when fighting or fleeing is not possible, or neither one of those eliminates the threat. The only way then to escape what's going on is to shut down. We dissociate. So we can become immobile in the face of threat, or feeling numbed out, disembodied, unable to speak or take action. We kind of like the deer in the headlights. And so these responses are really our body's way of trying to keep us safe in what the nervous system is perceiving as a dangerous situation. So when we are exposed then to mixed signals and confusing behavior, this can lead to that sense of threat. We perceive these things as threatening because they compel us to question our safety, right? What is the quality of the connection here? And that usually determines how safe we are. So mixed signals can look like, a partner is very loving one minute and then they're distant the next. They're inconsistent in their communication or with their affection. Maybe they have unpredictable moods or reactions to things. And so this kind of behavior indicates to us that something is not safe. And so the nervous system switches on and is going to lean towards these fight, flight, or freeze responses. And so if those responses are triggered repeatedly over time, then what happens is the nervous system and the amygdala are kind of on high alert. And this can create a kind of chronic constriction of energy and stress and anxiety in the body. And so when you never know what to expect from someone, one day your partner is affectionate and attentive, and then the next day they're very cold and distant, it's hard to find stable ground. And so then we start to question things about ourselves. Am I contributing to this instability? What am I doing wrong that they are showing up in this way or disregarding me in this way or mistreating me in this way? And then we start coming up with whatever explanations we possibly can. And oftentimes we start turning it in on the self because that lets us believe that maybe I have more control over this than I thought I did. And if it's something wrong with us, then it must be something we control. And so our ego prefers to make up stories like that, even if it's not true, even if it has nothing to do with us. So we're in this negative environment. We're responding to inconsistent mixed signals and cues. So what then occurs inside of us that compels us towards one way or another, right? In how to cope with that. So our inclination towards a specific survival response, a fight, flight, or freeze response, is usually influenced by this combination of epigenetic expression, our environments, and our temperament. So epigenetics refers to how our genes are expressed based on our experiences, and they are typically triggered by the environment. So for example, early childhood experiences of safety or threat can shape which of our genes that we may have inherited from generations past get triggered and turned on. So Omri Gillis research has shown that, for example, individuals that are prone to anxiety, if there were the previous generation and the generation before that experienced things like poverty or warfare or particularly difficult dysfunctional dynamics, that it can be passed on in the genes. A sensitive anxiety response can be passed on in the genes. And if they grow up in an environment that is, let's call it dysfunctional or particularly difficult, then those genes are more sensitive to being turned on. And so a nurturing environment, of course, can foster more security, while a more chaotic one can lead to heightened survival responses because it's difficult to find that safety. Now, temperament is this innate trait that we are born with that influences our responses to things and also how we manage our emotional regulation. And historically, temperament is categorized into three broad types. They're not really considered too politically correct anymore, but it used to be difficult, easy, and slow to warm up. Those terms have been changed to flexible, feisty, and cautious. So this more flexible temperament is characterized by having a more positive mood, being more regular in your rhythms and patterns of thought and response. You're more adaptable, and you tend to have moderation in the way that you respond to things. Whereas if you have a more feisty temperament, then there might be frequent negative moods, intense reactions to things. Maybe you behave more erratically or irregularly, and you're highly sensitive to your environment and tactile stimulation. If you tend to be more cautious, this temperament tends to mean that you initially have a negative mood towards things, or kind of a pause or withdraw response. There's lower activity levels. You're slow to warm up or adapt to things, and there's moderate sensitivity. Okay. And so temperament is typically looked at and assessed in early childhood when we see the way babies respond. So these three factors together determine which survival responses we are inclined towards, and that ultimately develops into what we might call an insecure attachment style. For example, avoidant partners lean towards a flight response, right? They want to flee. Then we have our anxious open hearts, and they tend to fight for a relationship. For individuals that have disorganized attachment, which is sometimes referred to as fearful avoidance or anxious avoidance, I call them spice of lifers, they can demonstrate a fast cycling or even a simultaneous presentation of both anxious and avoidant responses. And these are the folks that are also more likely to slip into a freeze response. So in a relationship, this can look like clinging to the relationship while at the same time emotionally rejecting connection and refusing to be vulnerable while you are in it. Now, remember, secure folks, they can respond to threats with the fight, flight, or freeze response as well, because that's a natural inclination of the nervous system. All human beings under the sun have this response. But the difference for someone who is secure is that after the threat has passed, they kind of shake it off, in the way you might see an animal kind of shake it off after encountering a threat. And that shaking it off allows them to return to a state of internal harmony and stasis, whereas someone who is insecure never quite goes back to baseline. They kind of remain in this hyper-aware state, and they're sort of anticipating the pain that they're avoiding at all times. It's almost like a fan whirring in the background all the time. And so that is how this shift from secure to insecure happens in adult relationships. Initially, you might start off as secure, feeling more confident in yourself and in the relationship, but then over time, after you have repeated exposure to someone who is sending you mixed signals, demonstrating confusing behavior, kind of gaslighting you, right? It's going to tell your nervous system that you're under constant threat. And it's not giving you enough time to recover and shake it off before the next confusing behavior pops up and appears and presents a threat. So the alarm bell of the nervous system never gets turned off. It just keeps on ringing. And so this is what leads us to start to doubt and question the relationship in ourselves. And so we have to necessarily learn how to develop some kind of coping skill or mechanism to deal with that. And so we develop a new pattern of thought feeling and behavioral response. And over time, those become predictable patterns. Now we fit into an assessment's categorization of some kind of insecure attachment style. So how can we prevent this? How can we prevent this and or even overcome insecurity if we already feel like we have it? If you're here, you know that I've created several courses to address that very question. And I've come up with specific frameworks depending on where you are in your starting point and what angle from which you're approaching this. My Attachment 101 courses are usually the starting point that I recommend for folks that are just starting out. And this is for individuals to dive deeply into their unique attachment style. And it takes you on a 7-step individual healing journey to help you identify the origins of your attachment style. What is the impact it's had on your life? How can you now connect with your needs and establish healthy boundaries around them? How can you start to look at the limiting beliefs that evolve from those experiences and reframe them? And then in the last part of those courses, we take a look at the inner child and we connect with the protective parts that might make us feel stuck. So for those of you that are watching this, if you haven't taken those courses, I'll include a quick link to the quiz that will help you decide which one you want to start with if that's something that interests you. Now, the other angle that I tend to look at this is in the realms of communication. And my course, The Courageous Communicator, approaches the healing process from that angle. So that course is a 90-day course. It teaches you communication skills based on attachment styles, and it incorporates trauma-informed somatic approaches to energy healing and art therapy techniques. I'm an art therapist, right? And so this way of approaching that question, I usually recommend for couples that are kind of stuck in a spiral, or they're trying to figure out if the relationship can last. Or it is also for people who are single and they're looking to expand their skill sets in the realms of communication and bring the knowledge that they've learned into a relational space. But overall, I would say any course that I have created and offered tends to fall under the umbrella of what I call the ACEs framework. And the goal of the ACEs framework and of any course that I offer is really to help you tap into what I think of as your core spiritual self so that you can access your own intuition and accomplish what I call soul-centered security. So soul-centered security is when we are reorienting our attachment proximity needs to our eternal spirit rather than to the conditions or to the people around us. And so our purpose here is to step into what I call the most sovereign self, which is a flexible ego that is in relationship to your spiritual self as well as the earthly plane, so that any relationship that you encounter becomes an extension of this kind of larger spiritual assignment you have for growth and expansion. And throughout your life and experience, it seems that relationships are really the classroom for that. So if you want to learn more about the details of that, I do have a video on my YouTube channel. It's called the ACEs Framework, Making Anxious Avoidant Relationships Work. And we'll be sure to leave a link to that somewhere attached to the replay of this video. So altogether, avoidant partners, they pull away because of their own unresolved fears and projections. And if we get caught in that, we wind up chasing them down, but that only ends up reinforcing their fears, and it keeps us stuck in this kind of painful cyclical cycle, push-pull dynamics. Instead, we want to shift the energy and the focus to looking at our own growth, setting clear boundaries, and creating a life that really aligns with your highest self and your deepest desires. And when you can accomplish that, it either draws them back to you in a healthier way, or they fade away and they make room for a more compatible partner to enter into your life. And so when we can understand how significant the nervous system role is here, influencing our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, responses, then it helps us to recognize how persistent, inconsistent environments can cause insecurity later in life, even if we started out as being more secure and with healthy upbringings. And so regardless of how we wound up in experiencing a more insecure attachment style, if we can reorient our attachment security towards a more transcendent understanding of ourselves and of love in general, then we are less subject to the conditions and the people around us. This is what I call inhabiting soul-centered security. When we can accomplish this, then relationships just become an extension of that larger assignment for spiritual growth and expansion. So I hope that helps. And if any of this resonates with you, I would love to know and see that in the comments and chat there. I'd love to see your feedback. Also, remember to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. I put out videos once a week and I wouldn't want you to miss out.